Happy Halloween to the Zervis channel. Today I'm going to be reading an excerpt from a short story of mine called Bloodlegum and Lolliknives. Lindy tugged her patchwork gingham dress up over her thin waist and buttoned the straps over her bare shoulders. A braided crimson mop sat crookedly on her head, thick curls framing her face. She winked at Pudge, then turned to study herself in a broken shard of mirror propped against the living room wall. Pudge's eyes sparkled with excitement. A moist lollipop stick protruded from his bow-shaped lips, sticky and glistening with lime-green residue. His upper front teeth hadn't grown in yet, turning his expression into that of a smiling ferret. He was dressed in a black sweatshirt, his face painted like a skull. Deep shadows circled his eyes, and his cheeks, still plump with baby fat, had been shaded to create false hollows. Pudge blew a puff of air to get his bangs out of his eyes and rolled his lollipop from one cheek to the other as he watched his sister get ready. Several candles cast flickering light around the room, puddles of melted wax along their bases. A stained mattress and a pile of dirty blankets sat in a corner of the room, smelling of urine and mold. Lindy moved a candle closer to the mirror for more light and drew the end of a charred stick over her face. With a few deft movements, she turned back. Black asterisks surrounded her emerald eyes, and a thick stitched smile was drawn across her face. She smiled at her reflection, admiring her teeth, all sharpened to points over the last few months. "Raggedy Ann!" Pudge squealed and clapped, his stubby hands making sticky noises each time they pulled apart. Lindy curtsied and waved her fingers at him daintily. Ma and Pa would have been proud of us tonight, Lindy thought. The night of the blood moon. Even now, Lindy missed them so much. But Ma and Pa had shown them the way, by Jesus. They had shown them the wrath of Cain and how on this night of all nights, sinners must be washed in the blood of the Lamb. Lindy turned as Crispin trotted bow-legged into the living room, swinging a hooked cane in wide circles. He glanced at Lindy, then at Pudge, and tipped the slanted bowler derby on his head. The charcoal-colored suit hung loosely from Crispin's lean frame. Mustard stained his dress shirt, and a black necktie fell past his waist. His baggy pants were dirty and torn, and tied around his waist with a length of cord. Except for a black smudge resting beneath his nose and two dark arches over his eyes, his face was powdered white. He wrinkled his nose and flexed his eyebrows up and down. "Charlie Chaplin!" Pudge giggled and clapped his tacky hands together again. He crunched down on his lollipop, making sounds like grinding glass, and spit his lollipop stick to the floor. They look so handsome, Lindy thought. Yes, Ma and Pa would be proud for sure. Lindy shook her head and pushed away another pang of grief for her parents. I've seen 11 blood moons. I'm the elder now. It's time for me to lead the night of the feed. Through the boarded front windows, the torn plastic tacked to the outside window flapped in the darkness. In the distance, the glow of town lights rested along the horizon, and seeing it, her pulse quickened. She began tucking what she needed beneath the fabric of her dress and handed plastic grocery bags to Crispin and Pudge. "It's time," Lindy said. "Time to feel the blood of the Lamb," Crispin whispered. They smiled at each other. Crispin blew out the candles, and hand in hand the three of them stepped out into the night. Ted watched as the repo truck pulled away from the front of his house, his blue Jetta trailing behind it. He checked his pack of cigarettes, down to the last one. That's one way to quit smoking, he thought. He shook it out of the pack, pulling it free with his lips. He lit the cigarette, crumpled the empty pack, and tossed it to the floor. It landed among a cascade of unsorted mail, most with "important notice" stamped across their fronts in bold red type. He kicked at the stack, watching his envelopes skittered across the hard wood floor. Ted felt hot and tingly, as if carpenter ants marched through his veins. He ran a hand over his grizzled face and scratched the whiskers along his throat. Ted smelled the soupy stink of his unbathed body. He let the curtains fall back into place, and pulled his bathrobe over his chest. The lights flickered and he paused, waiting for the electric to kick out, but it didn't. Phone's out, cable's out, Susan's out. And ain't any of that shit ever coming back. Fucking bitch, fucking gold-digging whore. Ted's mind wanted to continue, make a sing-song rhyme out of it. His stomach suddenly twisted in knots, as if he was on the threshold of a roller coaster ready to drop. Tears threatened, and Ted bit them back. He took a long drag off his cigarette and watched the wispy curls of smoke float up to the yellowed ceiling. He shoved an empty pizza box off the coffee table and grabbed a half-empty bottle of Johnny Walker, tilting it to the head and feeling its fire wash down his throat. He inhaled the last hit from the cigarette and flicked it to the throw rug, staring as fibers melted a dark halo around the glowing tip. The burning ember went out and Ted sighed, leaning back into the couch. Among the folds of his robe, Ted felt the weight inside his left pocket. He put his hand inside, felt the knurled handle, the balanced weight, and brought the butcher knife into the open. He turned it this way and that, watching the way the light played along the honed edge of the steel blade. A giggle burst free of Ted, and the sound of it in the quiet room startled him. "Get out of the goddamned way, Gizmo!" Ken nudged the Yorkie with his foot, and the dog yipped before jumping away. "Don't you kick him!" Esther held an in-progress scarf to her chest. She pointed a knitting needle at Ken, scolding him. "You leave him alone. He's just a little dog." "I didn't kick him. I just want him to get away from the candy." Ken shook his head and turned to pick up the candy he dropped on the kitchen floor. He winced at a sharp lance of pain in his hip, damned fall weather, and put a handful of peanut butter cups in the plastic jack-o'-lantern. He watched Esther walk away, a gray-haired angel in pink curlers. Her tinfoil halo and inflatable angel wings wobbled to the sway of her wide hips. "Goddamn the mutt," he muttered under his breath. "What'd you say?" "I said he's a pain in the butt." "You're a pain in the butt." Ken bit his lip and threw the last of the candy into the jack-o'-lantern. He lifted a cardboard box from the kitchen table. It was filled to the brim with an assortment of comic books, trading cards of every imaginable sport, matchbox cars, and candy jewelry. If Esther had her way, she'd spend their whole damned retirement on Halloween night. Ken carried the box to the front of the house, stepping past Gizmo, who blinked at him with his perennially leaky puffball eyes. His powder blue collar twinkled with plastic gems. A smug expression rested on his furred face. "Treats that damn dog better than she does me, for Christ's sakes." Ken feigned another kick at the dog, and it scampered out of reach. He smiled and set the cardboard box down on a table in the foyer. "What are you smiling about?" Esther's face was pinched, suspicious. Gizmo cautiously peered from around the corner down the hall. Ken turned back to Esther, his smile wider. "It's Halloween. It's supposed to be fun. Trick-or-treat and all that. Caramel apples and candy corn. After all, this is your favorite night of the year, isn't it, sweetheart?" Esther's eyes narrowed. "Go get your cape and put your fangs in. The kids should start showing up any minute." Esther threw a knitted white shawl over her shoulders. "And pour us some hot cider. It's cold out there." Crispin flipped the quarter high in the air and caught it on the descent, slapped it on his forearm. "Tails." He and Lindy exchanged looks, and Crispin shrugged. Lindy sighed, closed her eyes, and clasped her hands together. "In Jesus' name have mercy on those that giveth." Lindy's voice was low and steady. She opened her eyes and nodded at Crispin. The three of them climbed the front stoop of a brick rancher. Its porch was lined with rows of potted flowers and a small bale of hay. A pumpkin with a crudely carved face, seed spilling from its widely cut mouth, sat beside the front door. It smelled earthy and damp, the way Ma and Pa's room used to smell. Lindy stepped forward and rang the doorbell. A thin teenage girl in an oversized striped hat opened the door. "Trick or treat!" the three of them yelled in unison. "Wow, look at..." The girl's smile wilted as she looked them over. She cautiously held out a plastic witch's cauldron filled with candy. Pudge reached in, withdrawing a tiny fistful. Crispin took some next and tossed the candies in his plastic bag. Lindy took her turn last, and they bounded back down the stairs, mumbling thanks to the door closing quickly behind them. Pudge was the first to dig into his treats, tearing a wrapper with his teeth and stuffing a spongy wad of neon pink into his mouth. He bit into it, and pink syrup spurted from between his lips. Bloodlegum! Pudge used the back of his hand to wipe the syrup, creating a bright smear across his cheek. Come on, Pudge. Crispin picked through the loot in his bag with indifference and started walking back to the street. A face peered through the frosted glass at the home's door, and Lindy saw the blurred shape of the striped hat. She smiled wide at the girl, waiting for the jagged angles of her teeth to register. Through the frosted glass, she saw the girl's mouth open into a dark O. Lindy spun around and skipped to the tree. Ted matched the group of kids at the end of his driveway. A mummy, a princess, a dwarfed Spider-Man in a plastic mask. Their bags bulged, heavy from a good night's score of candy. Even from here he could see their smiles, could smell the nauseating sweetness of their happiness. Their collective joyful excitement made his stomach churn. Ted studied the faces of the ones not wearing masks. So innocent, so fucking happy. Completely naive of what waits for them in life. No grief or stress. Faces unmarked with heartbreak or betrayal. No idea what it's like to have it all and have it taken away. Tears sprang at the corner of Ted's eyes. They all laughed again, a high-pitched chorus. Ted heaved with nausea. He shook his head and took a drink of scotch. His vision blurred. They were all so beautiful. I have to help them stay that way. I have to. How can I let them get hurt? Let them grow up, finish school, and live the American dream? His tears spilled over, running down his cheeks. Give 20 years of your heart and soul, and they lay you off like you're nothing. Get married to a lifeless, soul-sucking... The tallest of the crew, the mummy, stared at Ted, and then glanced across the street toward the Doughertys. Their fog machine belched mist across the porch. An animated rubber corpse popped free of its plastic coffin, and static-laden organ music drifted across the street. The kids turned away like a school of fish, heading toward the entertainment. Flashlight beams danced in the street as they left him. Save them, Ted. You have to. The voice in his head came free like something tickling the back of his mind. The words were soft, gentle like the tone of a friend speaking reason, the kind of voice you could trust. Save them, Ted. Spare them the pain. Ted felt light inside, warm and bright, like springtime had arrived after a long winter. He had a responsibility, a purpose. More giggles spilled free from him. He put a hand over his mouth to stifle them and bit down on his tongue as he watched the group of kids across the street. Don't worry, angels. I'll save you. I'll save all of you. Crispin twirled his cane and poked Pudge in the back playfully. Laughing, Pudge scooted away, dropping an orange Kit Kat wrapper on the sidewalk. The lower half of his painted face was a smeared patchwork of colors. This one. Then he pointed to a cottage house with an inflatable black cat sitting on the lawn. Stalks of corn had been tied with twine to the porch posts, and rows of wax paper bags with candles in them had lined the pathway to the front door. Crispin patted his pants, making a show of not being able to find a quarter. He wiggled his nose, making his fake mustache move, and waved Pudge closer. Showing empty palms, Crispin reached behind Pudge's ear and produced the quarter. "Yay!" Pudge screamed, shaking his treat bag as he tried to clap. Crispin balanced the quarter on the tip of his thumb and flicked it toward the moon, watching its somersault winks as it fell. Snatching it from the air, he flipped it over, checked it, and grinned at Lindy. "Heads." "Heads," Lindy whispered. Her breath quickened. Her green eyes sparkled. She put her hands together and shut her eyes. "In Jesus' name we shall be washed in the blood of the Lamb." Lindy reached behind her dress, feeling the comfortable steel weight she'd tucked there. The meat cleaver had been Ma's. 3 blood moons ago, Ma had used it to wash Pa in his blood, show him his sins, and Pa, faithful as he was, had used nothing but his hands to show Ma the way. What a strong man Pa had been. But while they had still been alive, they'd shown them the light of showing the sinner the sin. She held the cleaver so the moon glinted from its surface. Crispin let his plastic treat bag fall to the asphalt, and they walked toward the house. The doorbell rang as Ken pulled 2 mugs of hot cider from the microwave and set them on the counter. He smiled at the world's greatest grandpa scrawled in mock crayon across the side of one of them. He listened for Esther and quickly opened a peanut butter cup and crammed it in his mouth, hiding the wrapper beneath some junk mail in the garbage can. Diabetes be damned. This is Halloween. He tied the string for his Dracula cape around his neck and fitted a set of plastic vampire teeth into his mouth. Esther's sweater was on the back of a kitchen chair, and Ken folded it over his arm and grabbed the mugs. From the front of the house, Ken heard Gizmo barking wildly. Goddamn mutt, he thought. Then he heard Esther scream. Ken dropped the mugs of cider and ran. They fell upon Esther like jackals. Lindy straddled Esther's chest and sunk the meat cleaver into her exposed throat. The flesh parted and blood sprayed over Lindy's chest and legs. Leaning forward, Lindy caught some of the spray against her mouth. She clawed her hands and ripped a gold crucifix necklace from Esther's neck, then stuffed it into the gaping wound. Crispin held a thick-soled foot on Esther's left arm, kneeling down as he pushed a knitting needle into her left eye. The scarf Esther had been knitting unraveled like entrails beneath him. Esther released an agonized scream. Her feet shook against the wood floor, beating a rhythm. Crispin pulled the knitting needle free, angling it as he did, and skewered Esther's eyeball like a shish kebab. It came loose with a soft sound like a champagne cork being popped, and dripped a trail of yellowish fluid across Esther's cheek. Crispin held the end of the knitting needle gingerly and tilted the bloody orb toward his mouth. Sitting cross-legged beside the plastic jack-o'-lantern, Pudge held Gizmo tightly in his grip. "Puppy!" he shrieked, and sank his teeth into the dog's rear haunch. So there you have it. There's a little excerpt from Bloodlegum and Lolliknives. That's in my collection, The God Beneath My Garden. Thanks again to everyone at the Zervis channel. I hope you all have an amazing, great Halloween. Thanks again.